According to the National Bureau of Statistics, no fewer than 133 million Nigerians, representing 63% of the population, are currently living in multi-dimensional poverty. The federal government of Nigeria, through the NBS, launched the report, which is the result of the 2022 Multi-Dimensional Poverty Index survey carried out by NBS and development partners. Of the total, 105.98 million poor Nigerians are located in rural areas compared to 16.97 million in urban areas. With a gross domestic product of $440 billion, Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa. But the country is caught in a deep poverty cycle. So how do we end Nigeria's poverty trap? Joining us on the show to discuss how we can turn this situation around is Kingsley Moghalu, a Nigerian economist and former deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Welcome to the morning show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Well, okay. I already introduced the subject. 1.3 million Nigerians are said to be in poverty, 72% of them in rural areas, 65% in the north, 35% in the south, 42% in urban areas. Now, the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics puts all of that at 63% persons poor. But you have a recent report that you did with Damian Ude, in which you even said the percentage is higher. It's 90%.
Absolutely.
It's more than 63%, your report says. Yeah. But the question is, where are you ended the matter and the title of your report? We all know we are all poor. Exactly. Even if they tell us it's 100% poverty, we will not doubt it.
Yes.
How do we end this poverty trap in Nigeria? That is the big question.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ruben. And thank you for making reference to my report, Nigeria's Poverty Trap, the report of the Institute for Governance and Economic Transformation. The way to end poverty is, first of all, to understand what the drivers of poverty in Nigeria are. When we say 90% of Nigerians are poor, there are several classifications of poverty. One is the $2.15 a day, which is extreme poverty. But normal poverty is less than $5.50 a day. And when you use that classification, very few people in this country can be said not to be living in poverty. So we have to understand the drivers of poverty and then address those drivers. For example, Nigeria is 62% literate. We have a 62% literacy rate. That means that a lot of people in this country are uneducated. And that is a major poverty driver. Population growth, uncontrolled population growth in this country is creating poverty. Then we have issues of the shocks that the Nigerian economy faces because we depend too much on oil for revenues, and various other drivers. So if you go and plug these drivers, then we don't have a strong social protection system. That is also a way to solve problems of poverty. Most countries that are well governed have very strong social security systems, because the truth is, no matter what you do, some people are bound to be poor. Jesus Christ said, the poor will always be with us. But they have to be protected, and that's why you need social protection systems that actually work. And we recommend that social protection in Nigeria should become far more robust, far more comprehensive, backed up by national legislation, so that it's not a matter of which government comes, they start this project, another government comes, they stop that and start their own. No. We should, for example, have a social security system in this country that protects people who are 65 years and over, regardless of any situation, especially those who don't have pensions. The reason there's so much corruption in this country is that people are afraid about what will happen to them in their old age, because there is no real social security. So these are the kinds of things that we need to do. We need to create an enabling environment for private sector job creation, so that young people can have the opportunity to create new businesses, new entrepreneurial ventures, and create jobs. 2, 3 in every small shop. If you multiply that by thousands, you're creating millions of jobs. So these are the steps to take. But the most important step, we say in our report, Nigeria's poverty trap and how to end it, is the political consensus that is still lacking on ending poverty as the #1 priority of the Nigerian state. The Constitution says that the security and welfare of Nigerians shall be the primary purpose of government. What is welfare? That's what we're talking about. The ability to have a livelihood, a decent life, to have hope, to be able to send your children to school, not to be devastated because there are floods that are caused by climate change. So, the political consensus is not yet there. Nigeria is not a nation, it's a country. And because of that, the reason people go into politics is very different from taking 100 million people out of poverty. That is not the ambition of most Nigerian politicians. They may say it when they're campaigning, but the reason people go into politics in this country is to advance personal interests, vested interests, sectarian interests. And when that is the case, a society that does not have a commonly shared ambition for themselves as a nation, a society that doesn't have a foundational worldview cannot successfully fight poverty.
Ayo.
Right, thank you very much. Just pondering on the facts, the statistics, the numbers you've mentioned. And of course, like Dr. Abati said, it's not surprising.
Yes.
The numbers are not surprising. We have talked about the fact that the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, in terms of the numbers and the figures they brought out, how accurate are these figures? And the last time that we had an accurate census to even measure the number of Nigerians we're looking at when we look at the indices is the percentages, the out of work, the poverty index, and the likes. However, you talk about, what really interests me as you spoke amongst the many drivers of poverty you've mentioned is the inability of the average Nigerian to handle shocks. So let's take, for instance, the recent flooding in parts of Nigeria.
Yes, absolutely.
It takes one catastrophe like that to push Nigerians to extreme poverty. What is the political class not doing right? Is it so difficult to establish a welfare state in a country like Nigeria? And what are the ways that political leaders can begin to look at setting up that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, setting up a welfare state, you've got to create wealth before you can redistribute wealth. So we must manage our macroeconomy very well so that we can have savings, some of which we can invest in social security. Then, of course, we have to take preemptive measures against climate change issues like floods, like desertification. President Buhari just ordered, I understand, that a plan be submitted to him within, did he say 90 days, to prevent future floods. But we've been having floods in Nigeria for so many years. Why has nothing been done about it? Every year or every other year, this happens, and it takes so many people into poverty. So we need to be preemptive. The way to solve the problem is, first of all, through the political route. You have to get into office people who think about problems in advance and actually have a plan to solve our problems. But it's not enough to have a plan. You have to have a plan to execute the plan. Because you can argue that every government in this country has had a plan. But why is it that these plans are not working and so many people are poor? It's because there is no risk management. There is no project management. You're doing a project, you know or you don't understand that it should be delivered with quality, on time, and under budget. Project management makes that happen. But you don't see that in any Nigerian contract or, there's no risk management. When you have a plan, there are always factors that can make that plan not to work the way you want. You must manage those factors in advance. These are the kinds of things. So you need people who have big, bold ideas, the competence to actually make public policy work for Nigerians. That's lacking in Nigerian politics. We're all politics, but no governance.
For me, it's the scary nature of the number, either way you look at it. I was just seeing from the report, there's 711 million people in extreme poverty. 1 in every 7 of them lives in Nigeria here. Vis-a-vis the roadmap of the president that he announced about 2 years ago, says he wants to bring 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years.
Yeah.
Why is it that these are buzzwords do not work? And also, the erosion of our wealth due to inflation and forex crisis.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
That is precipitating poverty. I mean, I want you to explain that
Yeah.
area. And that's why
Absolutely.
I also want you to
That's-
sound off on this CBN's Naira redesign and all of that and trying to mop up and the yo-yo way the currency is going up and down.
Well, the macroeconomy is a major problem in fighting poverty. That's one of the reasons people are getting poorer and poorer at a faster rate. You know, because inflation is rising so fast and so high that people's income, the value of the income they have, is not worth much. Their wages in any event are very small. The minimum wage in Nigeria is 30,000 naira or so a month. That's even less than the minimum poverty threshold. And we don't have a good approach to minimum wage management. We change minimum wage after decades. Minimum wage is something that in most countries is monitored annually so that it keeps a bit of a track with inflation, so that it has meaning. You can be calling a minimum wage 30,000 naira a month today. What does it mean to anyone? Absolutely nothing. So the macroeconomy, the value of the naira, you know, is really impacting the economy. And the way it's managed, in my own view, is impacting the economy quite negatively and becomes a major pass-through to inflation. And inflation is a big poverty tax on the poor. So we need better macroeconomic management, no question about that. But we also need massive investments in human capital. Many people don't understand one of the reasons China was able to take 800 million people out of poverty. I want to give you, in the report that we did, Nigeria's Poverty Trap, we went into the China experience and we explained and took out some lessons that Nigeria can use and adapt to our own circumstance. China manufactured political consensus to shift from socialism in the late 1970s towards a more capitalist economy. That was the product of a political consensus. And that's why I keep talking about this matter of the politics of it all. The second reason that China was able to succeed is that over the previous 50 years, since the late 1940s, even though China was poor, they were investing heavily in human capital. The Chinese person was averagely highly skilled. In 1978, China had a much lower GDP per capita than Nigeria. But today, it's one of the wealthiest countries in the world. So investments in skills, creating an enabling environment for job creation. You must combine the government approach of social protection and social welfare with individual opportunity. Part of the problem I see with the current government is that there's a lot of emphasis on the state and what it can do, but it doesn't do it efficiently. We have a number of social protection programs. Why are they reaching so few people compared to the numbers we're seeing from the National Bureau of Statistics and so on? First of all, we don't have very good data in Nigeria, but everybody has a cell phone. We can use this cell phone system far much more efficiently to target Nigerians and find out where they are and what their status is in terms of incomes. So targeting is weak. We don't have enough data, and then there's a lot of corruption and racketeering in some of these social protection programs. Even those who are in charge of it have admitted this, and that the programs need to be professionally audited. You know, more and more. They talk about audits by civil society. I don't think audits by civil society is good enough. I think audits by professional firms is what should be happening. So we need more transparency in the management of the social protection programs. We need more effective targeting. We need better organization. Most of the poverty in this country, from the reports we see, is in the north. We also have to address this matter of the population growth. Hey, we can't run away from it. If it continues on the current track, we have a massive social implosion ahead of us in this country.
Okay, the case study approach is always very interesting.
Yes.
You've mentioned China.
China
But
and
your
Brazil.
report also talks about Brazil.
Yes.
Where Lula,
Absolutely.
Nacio da Silva is back as president. What are those lessons that you think we can learn from Brazil, for example?
Exactly.
Because Lula has also been talking again about poverty. And in Nigeria, we've borrowed all these models.
Yes.
National poverty reduction strategy.
Yes.
There's something needs, seeds.
Yeah.
All of it targeted at reducing poverty.
Yeah.
And yet you say political consensus can do it.
Yes.
Who is going to be that consensus?
It's the job of the next government of Nigeria after the 2023 elections. I believe that this political consensus, the next president of Nigeria must consider it as a primary duty that he has, because the main contenders are all men, to begin to build this consensus. So the next president must be able to bring people from the private sector, the clergy, the traditional rulers, the former military heads of states, and so on, and say, look, can we have a vision about a society, the kind of country we want Nigeria to become? And what are the specific steps we need to take? Some of the steps that need to be taken by the government to lift people from poverty affect the vested interests of very wealthy people in this country. The Nigerian elite is compromised. They are using the Nigerian state to serve their own vested interests. So there must be a deal that says, look, you will lose something here, but here's what you can gain down the road. This is what happened in China. You talk about Brazil. The difference between Brazil and China is as follows. China took 800 million people out of poverty mainly because it shifted away from socialism to a more capitalist economy. So that generated a lot more talent, energy, wealth, and so on. In Brazil, there's a lot of focus on the social protection programs of the government, but they have been more effectively run, especially in the years of Lula. And that's why Lula was able to come back, because many people remembered that he took millions of his government, took millions and millions of Brazilians out of poverty.
20 million.
Exactly. So this was something that distinguished him politically. He was seen as pro-poor. Whereas Bolsonaro, that he was competing with, Bolsonaro had his own strengths. But during COVID, he was behaving in a way that did not recognize the threat that COVID was. Brazil had the highest numbers of COVID deaths after the United States. So you could see the election was very keenly fought between the two of them and was very close, but ultimately Lula won. And it was because of his previous government's work on poverty. The poor remembered that Lula gave them opportunity. We need to universalize secondary school education. Everybody in Nigeria should not only go to primary school for free, in my view, but they should go to secondary school for free. If you want to go to a private secondary school and you can afford it, that's fine. But the government should be able to make secondary education free. This will massively improve Nigeria's human capital status. And that translates into economic gains because, especially if we shift the curriculum towards technical skills, vocational skills, then people begin to create jobs for themselves. That's how wealth is created. The government cannot create jobs. They create the environment where people create jobs for themselves. And that's macroeconomic management needs a completely new approach from what we're seeing. If you are making Forex, you have multiple exchange rates. How can a country like Nigeria with multiple exchange rates say they want to make progress? Why should somebody who is sending his child to school abroad buy the dollar for less than somebody else? Well, it's because most of the people who send their children abroad are the Nigerian elite. So they have made a foreign exchange rule to benefit themselves. This is what I say about the elite consensus. You see? So if, for example, we said we have a flat rate for Forex that is transparent, you will see so much dollars come into this country because we have over 200 million people, huge market. And when the dollar starts chasing you, its price will fall. That's the economics of it, And then, of course, we need to manufacture a lot more here and then export. And for us to be able to manufacture a lot more here and export, we have to watch the international trade situation very carefully so that local manufacturers are not at a disadvantage. How do you do that? One of the things you do, I have always said, people can import champagne if they want. Those who are rich enough, but they have to pay the price of it. I was in Brazil some years ago when I was deputy governor of the central bank, and I went into a shop in Brazil. They showed me 2 pairs of shoes. One was made in Brazil, one was imported from Italy. My God, the price difference was so huge. So, you know, when people want to import, let them pay for it. But in doing so, you are making the cheaper local product more available and more affordable for Nigerians. Of course, we have issues of infrastructure, electricity, which adds 40% to the cost of every business in Nigeria. That's huge. So that's also a very important area. So there's a combination we need to use in Nigeria of more effective social protection programs for the poor and creating a better environment for entrepreneurship, small businesses, so that people can have opportunity. We have to have a better taxation system, not to increase taxes, but to expand the tax net. There has to be a wealth tax. A lot of people are very wealthy in this country, but they're not paying their fair share. In America, in Europe, they do.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about enabling a thriving business environment for small businesses especially.
It is very
This administration set up the Enabling Business Environment Council. So it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on how well you think they've done in terms of providing a better climate for small businesses to run in Nigeria.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, I'd like you to speak on food prices. I know before we translate into the solution, still looking at some of the drivers of poverty in Nigeria. You look at the high food prices. You, in your report, 60% of Nigeria's inflation rate can be attributed to food prices.
Absolutely.
We have seen, you made comparisons between Nigeria and the food spending rate of countries, thriving economies like the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia at 1-digit% of food prices.
Whereas,
so what is the big problem? Because
the big problem,
for this administration, there were a number of programs and interventions, especially from the CBN, of which you were once the deputy governor, towards reducing the prices of food, encouraging local producers, yet it is still not translating. At this point, it seems like food is at the highest. A number of people in Nigeria spending over 60% of their income on food. This is a big problem. How can we tackle it?
The problem we have in Nigeria, because you cannot solve your problem if you do not understand your problem. The problem we have in this country is that we come out with all these policies and all these initiatives without going to solve the fundamental problems. What is the fundamental problem of food in Nigeria? 1, conflict. The Boko Haram conflict, the bandits, all these, the killer headsmen in the Middle Belt, all these things are affecting the food basket areas of Nigeria. People are not going to their farms anymore. Many people have been dispossessed and they are now internally displaced persons, refugees. So if you don't solve the problem of the conflict in the Northeast, in the Northwest, in the Middle Belt, you cannot affect the price of food in a positive way. If you don't arrest that situation and you're doing anything else concerning food, you will not be able to solve the problem. So that's one of the very fundamental things. You cannot run an economy if you don't understand what creates wealth in an economy. The government in this country is too involved in the economy, and that's the problem. Simply create an enabling environment and regulate the space, but the government wants to do everything. And we don't have a capable administrative state the way China has. The civil service in this country has broken down and is very weak, and they cannot deliver services effectively. So when you don't have that, and you want to have a strong state, what you create is dysfunction and utter chaos. That's the problem with this country. If you want to create an economy that works, go and understand what makes economies work. The first thing is that you must have property rights. The second thing is that you have to have a lot of innovation going on. The third thing is that you have to have capital that is affordable. One of the reasons we don't have affordable capital is that we place too much emphasis on credit. But there's also venture capital if you go to the economies that work. So we need to let the private sector And the government can invest in a massive private sector venture capital fund, but it must be run by the private sector, because if you make it a government program, it's yet another AWOOF money. And that's the problem, not coming with the right approaches. You say you have a good intention, but most of what you're doing is not working because you're not doing it right and because you have not studied the problem deeply. You haven't gotten to the foundation. I've told you about conflict. Yeah. For example, if you don't fix the war in the Northeast and you're talking about bringing down the price of food, are you serious? It's not rocket science. People cannot get to their farms. You see? So no matter what you do, you must go and stop that war. If you stop that war, you've solved 50% of the problem. Then you can then invest in value chains, like cultivation, using high yield seedlings, for example, that have a lot of yield over small acres of land. That's one important way to move agriculture forward. Then you invest in cultivation, you invest in transportation, you invest in processing, storage, export. All these investments should be done by the private sector. It's not the government trying to do it. It won't work.
Okay. I'll just pack in 3 ideas because we're out of time.
Sure.
Did your modeling take into account the robust informal sector? That's number 1.
Yes.
Number 2, did your modeling also take into account the question of PPP, purchasing power parity, relativity? All right. When you look at things like the Big Mac index,
absolutely,
$5 threshold, but don't forget that 1,000 Naira can buy you some meals in Nigeria, even more than
absolutely,
America.
Yes, of course, yeah.
And also, the case about, yes, we're doing all this education and all of that, but if you read the works of Bernanke and Dufalo, husband and wife, Nobel laureates, economics, that worked a lot about poverty.
For economics.
Yeah. They will always tell you about the fact that, yes, if you are trying to educate, but also forget there should be an emphasis on labor.
Yes.
Because if labor is depleting because of education, there's an imbalance in the economic sector in the country.
Absolutely.
And it flatters. So just 3 ideas, if you can talk through.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for mentioning that. First of all, let's start with Duflo's idea on labor. Only 17% of the people who are employed in this country are employed in the kinds of jobs that can enable them come out of poverty. Many people are employed in agriculture, but that's not giving them a very decent livelihood anymore. So it's necessary to create wage jobs. People should be paid by the hour, so that how much you work is how much you earn, not that you have a flat salary. I believe one of the presidential candidates, I think it was Peter Obi's, I saw in their own thinking, came out with this idea that they would favor a wage, an hourly wage approach. So this is one way to handle the issue of labor, restructuring the labor market. Of course, population, if you continue to grow the population indiscriminately, it will also affect the labor market because too many people are chasing too few jobs. It's just very basic. So we have to educate people on, family planning, not by force, the way they did it in China. China could not have transformed itself if it did not stop its, massive population growth. So what was the other point you raised again?
The second point was that the modeling taking into consideration
the
formal sector.
Of course, the formal sector and PPP.
And PPP.
Yes, of course, you must look at the informal sector in Nigeria, which, before now has been almost 65% of the GDP. So when you actually discuss poverty, that's why there's no agreement that is universal, because, you have to look at a country like Nigeria has a huge informal sector. Before the recent surge of inflation, a lot of the poverty statistics could be mediated by this factor of the informal sector. You cannot measure the informal sector very accurately. We must bring them more into the formal sector. So that's one. PPP, yes, that's a fact. What you can buy with 500 Naira in Nigeria or even 700 Naira, it's different from what you can buy with a dollar in the US. You see? So there are always local factors, and we took this into account. But having taken all of this into account, almost 90% of Nigerians still live in poverty.
Kingsley Moghalu, thank you very much for joining us. But before we go, how far again with your presidential ambition? Or you've given up on the presidency of Nigeria?
Well,
if not on the country.
I have not given up on Nigeria. I can tell you that.
That's reassuring.
Yes. Oh, no, I haven't, even though it's frustrating for a lot of us as citizens. Right now, I'm not involved in partisan politics. I'm not a member of any political party. I'm focused on my professional life. And this report that we have just done is a major contribution. There are many ways you can contribute to nation building. We don't all have to be in politics. And even when I was in politics, I was never a desperate politician. I have a second address, including the I Get address. And that's why this report is out.
Okay, congratulations on the report. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.